I'm a private school teacher.
I am a medical liaison.
I am a registrar's assistant at Midwestern University.
I'm a student at Ottawa
I am a
University.
business analyst.
Youth corrections officer.
Registered.
I'm a singer-songwriter.
I am
also
a
a student at
student worship pastor at Young Adult.
I am a electrician.
I am a
I'm a VMI operator.
business technology. My name is Nick.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Brad. I haven't had a chance to, whoa. Can you hear that? Or is it just me? It's a Conor McGregor effect from last night. Too many blows to the head, I think. I don't know what that means. I'm going to be out in the plaza area after the service, and if I haven't had a chance to meet you, I really would like that opportunity. And so if you'll stop me, I would like to introduce myself to you. So as you can see, we're talking about In the Arena. You may not know what that is all about. We began this series last week, and it has to do with what does it look like to live in the arena of our workplace. We're going to spend a third of our life, if we work about 50 years or so, in our place of work, marketplace, school, that kind of thing, which amounts to about 100,000 hours of our life. And at times it feels like an arena, that we're in combat, that not everything is as we wish it was, or we feel a bit of a dead end kind of spot, or we don't feel fulfilled in our jobs. And, it's such a big part of our lives, and to not find fulfillment in it is, well, it just may not be the design, may not be what God intended. And so we've been looking at living in this arena of our workplace through a couple of questions. First one being, does my work matter to God? Like, is he even interested in it? Does it matter that much to him? Or is it just something that he provides income through, and whether I'm fulfilled in it or feel purposeful is kind of secondary to him? Or does it really matter what specifically I do? We looked at last week kind of a theological framework and foundation for this, in that you don't even get out of the first chapter of the first book of the Bible before the concept of work it comes into play. And guess who's working? The creator of the whole deal is working. We're told that this is a work of love and creative genius on his part, but there's a purpose behind it, and we're the beneficiaries of it. I was thinking this last week that imagine this. Like, this was God's design. Build something incredibly wonderful and spectacular and ever expanding and can't be fully explored and can't be fully measured, and then turn it over to a group of people who are totally inexperienced at this. Don't know the first thing about how to keep that thing going, but he does that. Imagine this. You have worked your entire life in medical research, and finally you have come up with the cure or a procedure for an illness, disease that has inflicted humanity for eternity past. And you have come up with that thing that's going to save just a ton of lives throughout the world. And you're about ready to launch it, and you find a middle school kid that's taken a first aid class, and you turn the thing over to them to do the whole deal. Like, that's almost irresponsible, isn't it? Well, this is what the God of creation does. He creates this whole thing, amazingly, a masterpiece. And then he creates that which he's most, this is prized creation. No experience at this. And he goes, you go ahead and do it now. I'm going to turn the thing over to you. You reign over it. Oh, but there's something more that he does, because it actually would be irresponsible to just do it that way. He turns to his creation and said, guess what? You want to have the greatest adventure ever? Let's you and I do this together. You and I will do this together. We'll continue to build and form. We'll populate this world. It's going to be a grand paradise. But here's the thing. I'm not going to make you do that. You can do it if you want to. You can do it if you find value in it. You can do it if you want to do it with me. And if you don't, I'll still let you reign over it. But it's going to go badly. So what do you want to do? It's amazing to me to think of this. And so what do we learn from that? Well, whatever you put your hands to, that's part of what God has given. Whether you're retired and you've worked your career and you're trying to figure out what do I do that's fruitful now, or whether you're in school preparing for a career, or whether you're in the career, there is no menial, insignificant, purposeless job that you do. It might feel like it, I know, but it just isn't. because it's all part of this grand creation, expansion, redemption of the world that God's doing through you and through me. Your work matters to God. It matters so much to him. Now, admittedly, it's not always purposeful, it seems. It doesn't always feel fulfilling. Sometimes you work with really difficult people, and it's challenging and all that goes with it. But never, ever can you turn to God and say, my work does not matter to you. Because it does. Because he's a worker and he's given this grand idea over to us. So that's what we looked at last week. This week, the second question is, does God matter to my work? Well, what's the point there? Well, many of us in this room, maybe all of us, would self-identify as Christians, and a good percentage of us would identify ourselves as followers of Jesus. You know, like every day we're engaging with him, and he's part of our world, and we spend time with him, and we communicate, get direction from him, do life with him, make decisions with him. He dictates, directs our morality and how we're going to live life and all of that, okay? And the question is, does that matter in the workplace? Does it make a difference? Is it different in any way than someone who wouldn't claim that? So does that relationship with God actually matter in our workplace? Throughout human history, there's been kind of two ways that this has been processed, this idea of God mattering to our work. And it's taken from a short passage that John records that Jesus said. And this is what he said at one point. He says, be in the world, but not of the world. Right? Well, through the course of history, that has prompted two kind of approaches. One is kind of a triumphalism. That is, it's a really negative view of the world. The world's in terrible state, and somehow we have to reclaim the world for Jesus by imposing our moral view on the world, our Christian ethics onto the world. So it's kind of a triumphal kind of approach. So we're definitely in the world because we are going to change the world for goodness for Jesus. The second is with kind of a withdrawal idea. That's the second half of that verse that says, not of the world. And this is somebody who might approach work from the perspective of, look, it's unrelated to my faith. I just go like make a living and mind my own business and don't try to ruffle any feathers. And then when I'm away from work, that's when life with Jesus really takes hold. Or it's a person that says, look, I'm not working in kind of a secular, non-Jesus environment. I'm only going to work in a Jesus kind of environment, because you kind of withdraw from culture. So there's the triumphal kind of view and the withdrawal kind of view, and neither one are what Jesus would have to say. He actually has a third way. He has this idea of coming into our world to redeem and reconcile the world to himself. And he says, when he's baptized, when he first comes, he says, now the kingdom of God is near. What's that mean? Well, a little refresher on what the kingdom of God is all about. A kingdom is a kingdom if there's a king. And Jesus now says the king has arrived. He's near, he's present, he's come here. And what makes him a king is not just the title, it's the fact that a king is a kingdom where he gets his way. With how it should work is how it works. Now, fortunately, we have a really good king. He's kind and he's benevolent and he's forgiving and he's merciful and he's gracious and he's holy and he's right and he's good and he's all these wonderful attributes that God the Father is. And this is our king. And this is who comes into our world. And then he says, take that which you are king or queen over, that which you have say over, and move it into my kingdom. And let me have say over what you have say over. And in that environment, it isn't a triumphal kind of thing where we just take over the world and we don't withdraw from it. We live in his kingdom, and life with him so saturates who we are that it forms who we are and how we function, especially in a place like our work where we spend so much time. It's about bringing our work environment into his kingdom with him. 20 years ago, or 20 years after Jesus walked on the face of this earth, one of his proteges, Paul, wrote about this subject matter in a couple of letters that he wrote to some first century churches. And he actually says the same thing in a couple of letters. Here's the first one. He's in Ephesians 6:7, he says, work with enthusiasm as though you were working for the Lord. That's kingdom kind of language. Another one in Colossians, he says, work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord. There it is again. Well, what does that mean practically and specifically? Couldn't it mean if you work for the Lord, it's kind of a triumphal view. We're just going to take over the world and impose our Christian ethics and morality in our world. Well, couldn't it also mean we withdraw from it? Couldn't we do that as if we were working for the Lord? Well, in order to make those verses make sense, we have to go back just one paragraph in Colossians and read the context of what Paul has written. So let me take you back 5 or 6 verses. In Colossians 3:16, it says this. This is where Paul starts. Let the message about Christ, really important, underline it, the message about Christ in all of its richness fill your lives. Teach and counsel each other with all the wisdom he gives. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. And whatever you do, that's just about everything. Whatever you say, that's just about everything. Do all of it, as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. In other words, there is something in what Jesus taught, the message of Christ, Paul calls it, that is a third way, and it results in us working as a person who does their work and says their things as if they understand consciously that they are representing Jesus Christ. There must be something in it that's profoundly shaping for us. It appears that if a person understands the message of Christ and fills their life with it, that it is so pervasive and so powerful that the person ends up doing everything as if they think they're representing Jesus in that moment in real time. They actually become, they don't try, they actually become salt and light in the culture, which is incidentally what Jesus suggests that followers of his will become. He calls them in Matthew 5, you'll be salt, you'll be a preservative, you'll be wonderfully savory in the culture, and you'll be a city on a hill, you'll be a light. It is as if whatever this message of Christ is becomes the lens through which a person sees all of life. And that must include our work. If that is the case, then our work not only matters to God, but God matters to our work. You see, here's the human condition. We all see our lives and the world around us through a certain lens or viewpoint. It's a kind of default perspective through which we interpret events and circumstances that happen around us or happen to us. It's like a filter, a story, a narrative that we run everything through to make sense of what's going on around. You could call it our worldview, if you wanted to call it that. If we see or experience something, we intuitively make sense of it through this certain bias. That happened because of this, and we just approach life that way. I'll give you an example. This is taken from Tim Keller's book, Every Good Endeavor, which he stole from Alistair McIntyre, who wrote a book along this subject matter. But this is what it is. He suggests this. Imagine this is you standing at a bus stop. Okay? We still have those apparently. Apparently this must have been written a long time ago. But okay. You're standing there, and a young man that you do not know comes up to you and turns to you and says, the name of the common wild duck is Histrionicus histrionicus. Yeah, that really happened. Now, even though you clearly understood what he said, that sentence makes absolutely no sense to you, right? Does that make sense to you? No, it doesn't. So what does it mean? Well, this is what we do. This is us as human beings. Instantly, our brain begins to try to orient itself to what this might possibly mean, and this is where our bias comes in. Our default in explaining this situation is to run it through our understanding of life and our world. We come to a conclusion as to what this means based on what the story is, the narrative, the worldview running through our minds. The only way to make sense of it is to know how to respond is to try to internally explain the story into which that event will fit. So perhaps you happen to have been exposed to the tragedy and sorrow of mental illness in your family. So the way that you make sense of what this young man has said is he may be mentally unbalanced or mentally ill. Now that's really sad, but it could explain it, right? Or possibly you recently met someone that looks very much like this young man at a local library where you were doing some research on the common wild duck. And you asked this person what the scientific name of the wild duck is. And he shows up at the bus stop, and it's just coincidental that he happens to find you there, and now he's got the answer. It's a comic solution, but I guess it could explain it. Or you're a fan of spy novels and suspense movies involving Ethan Hunt or James Bond. So probably the young man, you conclude, is a foreign spy waiting for a prearranged rendezvous, and this is his ill-chosen code sentence to identify his contact. That conclusion is dramatic and interesting, and it could explain it, right? It all depends on your worldview. It depends on your bias. It depends on who you are, what you've experienced. And we form these worldviews through our life, through experiences, oftentimes in our families and in our workplace. The point is that without knowing the truth, we put it into a story that seems like the truth and reflects our own bias and worldview. And then here's the thing. We respond based on the story that we are telling ourselves that makes sense of it, not necessarily the truth of the story. It's our worldview. And so our response is out of our worldview. If you walk away from the young man because you're afraid, or because it's uncomfortable that he may have a mental condition that is hurting him, it isn't just that you walk away, it's that you may miss your opportunity to help that young man. There's something on the line here. If you call the police because you're afraid and you feel threatened because you don't really put this together who he is, it's a case of mistaken identity, and that would be a bit embarrassing possibly. Or if you pick a fight with someone who's a trained foreign assassin, that could be deadly. So the consequences matter, right? So our worldview, our bias, determines the story we tell, and then it impacts the outcome of how this turns out. So if the story is wrong, your response is going to be wrong. And if you get the story of the world wrong, if you see life as mainly about self-satisfaction and self-fulfillment, rather than the story of Jesus and the loving, healing, truthful King Jesus and his kingdom, then our life responses will reflect that, including how we do our work. This is what Paul writes again. Let the message about Christ so fill your life, so saturate you, that it ends up that you look at all of life through that lens and you become a representation of Jesus Christ in your world. That makes the message of Christ and our understanding of it absolutely vital. So what is the message of Christ that is so important, that is so pervasive, that it might form our worldview and affect everything we do? What are the details? Well, the story of Christ is really a master story. It's an overarching narrative. It's the story that we're meant to live in. It's the story that we tell ourselves to make sense of life, and it captivates our attention and explains daily existence. The story, like every truly good story that's captivating and lasting, begins with something really, really good. And then that which is really, really good becomes unbalanced and it becomes broken and it becomes ruined and it's disappointing and it's askew. And as the plot unfolds, the protagonist in the story tries to get things back into balance and fix and redeem, and the antagonist continues to work to block and resist those efforts. And finally, the story culminates with a struggle that either ends in the restoration of that which was broken or a failure to restore it, and something is lost and damaged forever. An example of that would be the original Star Wars movie. What a movie. What a story, right? But you know, it likely would never have made it onto the screen if the story had simply been this. It's an account of a farmer named Luke Skywalker buying a small trash can-like android and putting it to work on the farm for him. Not much of a story, right? No, the story actually starts to take shape when, as Luke is cleaning the trash can like Droid, a desperate holographic message asking for help to save the whole empire comes onto the screen. It's accidentally revealed. And something now is not right. And now the dramatic life and death struggle to make it right begins between this Jedi Knight, empowered by the Force, and a ragtag band of rebel forces against the dark evil empire of Lord Darth Vader. Yeah, dramatic for sure, but still, these are just facts. The complete story needs to have an account of how life should be, an explanation of how it got off track, and some kind of proposed solution to make it right again. That's what makes it a story, not just a set of facts. And this is going to come as Luke slides his X-Wing fighter through a tiny exhaust port in the Death Star. And miraculously amazing, cheats death. He destroys the reactor core, blows up the Death Star, and victory is theirs. And Luke and Leia and Hans they're heroes to the Empire. What a story, right? It's interesting because that actually becomes the pivot point of the rest of the 8 movies in the franchise. It doesn't change from movie to movie because this is the captivating story that actually forms the series. Likewise, the captivating story of the gospel, the good news of Jesus, is meant to be captivating like that. You see, a worldview is not just a set of facts, it's a master story. It's what informs us what the world and our lives are meant to be. It reminds us of what was knocked off balance and that something is not as it should be. It explains what can be done to make it right, and it pervades every part of our lives. So what is the story, right? Well, the story is this. God made a wonderful world, which he called good. And then he put a prized possession on the face of that earth, and he said, oh, they're very good because they're made in our likeness. And they are the object of all of my love. I wanted so desperately to love someone, and so I created them to love them. And I just think they're going to love me back. But something gets off balance, right? Something gets broken. Autonomy comes into it and self-sufficiency, and I want to do it my way, and I want to try it without you, God. And then things get totally ruined and wrecked, and it's just it's a bad part of the story. Everything gets wrecked. And that's just the first 3 chapters of the story. The rest of the story is about how the protagonist tries to put it all back together again. How he tries to redeem it and restore it and heal it and fix it and forgive it and have mercy for those that have wrecked it so badly and to invite them in. And he does it through Abraham and Moses. He does it through Joshua and Jacob. And he does it through prophets and priests and kings. And then we have an amazing story of how he himself comes into this world incarnate as a human being to fix the problem. It's this life and death struggle that ultimately Jesus pays such a horrible price for. But it's about redeeming the world. It's about redeeming you and me. It's about reforming us and making us not just different people who behave differently, to make us entirely new people. And he invites us into that and to give us new life. And he says, and now when you find that, what has happened to you, what is built up to the place where you made your decision, I'm now going to give you a brand new worldview through that, how you are so unlikely to be picked for that. But you were, and you said yes, and now you're a new person. And now you live the whole rest of your life through that lens, through that worldview. That once was what was really good, got really broken, and you wrecked it with your autonomy. But Jesus came to restore it. And now you're an agent of his to restore the rest of the world with him. Go live like that. Let that invade your thinking. Let that be what helps you make decisions. Make that which you think of the people you work alongside, you go to school with. Love them in the way you've been loved because you've been loved so much. Forgive in the way you've been forgiven because you've been forgiven so much. Be a restorer and a redeemer and a healer. Be a good person from the inside out because that's who you've been made. This is the grand story. And no wonder Paul says, that's the story of Jesus. And when you live that and that becomes so pervasive in your world and your life, you are going to become like Jesus in your workplace. Does your work matter to God? Oh my goodness. Does God matter to your work? He's the deal. He's everything. And this is what he sets out to do. So what are the implications for this? Well, here's our tendency. It's my tendency. It's my temptation, still is today. That if I don't find my identity in that story, I will likely find my identity where I work. And you see, we're made to find our identity in that story. Here's how it works for me. It has in the past anyways. I recall when I was a young business guy, and I had set my dream on being the executive vice president with our company, and that was my goal, and that was my dream, and that was what I was going to work for. And so every opportunity to advance myself that came along, I said yes to it. It meant moving a bunch of times, but that was all just part of climbing that ladder. And every time I got a promotion, every time I got a raise, guess what? I felt really good about myself. And why shouldn't I? Right? So after 9 years with this company, I am placed in a role of managing our flagship retail store in a large city. And I'm pretty sure I've arrived. And then something happened. I look back at it today and I go, how did that happen? I would never do that today. I hope I would never do that. Here's what happened. My store was open 363 days a year. That's too short of like every day. And I was there for part of, or all of, 363 days. It wasn't all day, but sometimes I would stop in. I'd stop in for an hour or two or whatever. I remember repeatedly, Sunday morning, getting my family up and ready to go to church, kiss Elfie and the kids goodbye as they went off to church, and I went off to work. And it made sense to me. It seemed like the logical thing to do. Because I'm making away from my family, and this is fulfilling, and it's, look at all the accolades I get. It just made sense. You see, if we do not find our identity in the grand story of Jesus, we will find it someplace else. And that's what turns the quality of our work becomes the quality of who we are or our value. To which Jesus would say, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss it. So let me ask this question. In your daily life, maybe even just in this last week or two, what is it that has come into your life that you would say, that really made me feel valuable? The other side of it, what did you fail at, potentially, the last few weeks that made your value less? That just might be where your identity is. And that, if that's other than a walk with Jesus where even failure, it appears, turns out to be something that is growth. We just miss on something. Jesus matters so much to our work. Here's the second thing that happens. When we get this right, it actually shapes our morality. It shapes the decisions we make and how we make them. It shapes, if you're a business owner, it shapes the ethics of how you're going to do business. It shapes how much you're going to pay yourself, how much of the dividends you're going to take for yourself, and how much you're going to share with other people. It shapes how you hire employees. It shapes the ethics of the professional way that you're a doctor or a lawyer or a plumber or a baker or a butcher or a candlestick maker, whatever it is. It shapes your ethics. Again, when I was a younger guy in business, I was working for a very successful family-owned business. And I got a call one day from the owner of the business. And he said, "Hey, Brad, it's Zan, and I want to ask you to do a favor for myself and my family." Talk about leverage, right? That's the way it worked. He said, my son is in a first year of college in your town, and he just got his class schedule, and all his classes are in the evening. And really part of the college life is just enjoying life, and now he's got all his classes in the evening. Would you be willing to write a letter to the college explaining that he works for you, that he's an essential employee, but he won't be able to keep his job if all his classes are in the evening? Well, that's not a bad letter to write. He didn't work for me. He wasn't my employee. I didn't even know him. I'd never met him. But Brad, it's Zan. Would you do it for me and my family? So who's going to know if I ever write the letter, right? Nobody really, except me. And so there I am sitting in my office. I'm contemplating, do I write it? Don't I write it? What do I do? And I go, I just can't write this. It's not truthful. It's not right. And Jesus, I want my life to stand for something. And so I remember, I can see it today, picking up the phone. There's still like phone on a headset with buttons. Pick it up, my hand is shaking. And I called Zan and I said, Zan, you might not understand this. I can't write that letter for you because it's not true. He slammed down the phone, hung up the phone, whatever he did, I never heard from him again. Never. We would go to business meetings and he would avoid me, he wouldn't want to talk to me. See, I hurt him. And I kind of betrayed his family. That still lives with me today. Because those are hard decisions. There's a price to be paid. But when you look at the context of the story of Jesus, who risks everything for us, comes into this world driven by a love for broken humanity, you and me, gives up his life, it doesn't appear to be turning out well. If that's the story you see life through, it actually affects your morality and your ethics, not because there's a book that tells you how to do it, but because the inner story of God's redemption and his goodness in your own life actually trumps the worldview of other things. It's an amazing thing. So here's the question. How often do you think about what the dominant worldview of your life is? When you go to work tomorrow, if you go to work tomorrow, if tomorrow you wake up and it's another day of retirement, if you're off to school tomorrow, what's that all about? Why are you going? What's the narrative that runs through your mind in that? Is it because it's a pathway to a wonderful career? Is it the reward of having worked hard and now just taking it easy and lying back? Is it to earn money and to make a name for yourself and to do really well in the world? Those are all okay. They're all good, in fact. But here's the problem. When the good becomes the ultimate good, that's where the problem comes in. And so, can I encourage you, think through what's the master story I live through? Is it the fact that I have been redeemed by Jesus Christ? That I have been forgiven? And so I become a forgiving person. I have been treated so generously, and I become a generous person. I have been healed and fixed in so many ways. And so I, rather than criticize and complain about others, I bring healing and encouragement and joy into their world. Jesus came into the world to serve. It's a crazy idea. And so I go into my world and I serve selflessly. This is why Paul writes, get the story of Jesus, the message of Jesus, and it will so infiltrate your world. Without thinking, you'll actually become a representation of him wherever you work, where you will spend a third of your life. What opportunity we have. What an opportunity. Jesus, thank you for blazing a trail for us, for setting a path before us, for then coming along and helping us realize something's broken here, something's not right. And rather than just correct our behavior or give us another set of rules to follow, you actually come in and give us a way to be new people, to be restored with your Father, to be forgiven, to experience mercy, to bathe in grace, to be showered with your goodness. And Jesus, would that be how we see life? Would we live out our life and go to our schools and go to our places of work and even in retirement? Jesus, maybe that be the story that informs all that we do and gives us our identity in you. And we'll be grateful as you increasingly do that in our lives. Amen.